Where are you right now? Not in the grand, cosmic sense, just here in this exact moment. Maybe you're curled under blankets, feeling the quiet weight of night pressing against your windows. Maybe you're on a couch, the room dim, the air still. The world outside moves on, but in here, it's just you, breathing in your own rhythm. What time is it in your corner of the world? 1 a.m., a slow afternoon where the shadows lean long across the floor, or some strange in-between hour when the day hasn't decided whether it's over yet. Tonight, whenever tonight happens to be for you, I want to ask you something simple. Not a quiz question, not a riddle, just a quiet question you can let echo for a moment. What does it mean for things to fall apart? We've all seen it happen. The ice in your drink melts, flowers fade, the perfect stack of papers on your desk slouches into chaos, friendships drift, the sharp edges of a memory blur. Entropy, the scientists call it, the quiet, universal rule that everything tends toward disorder. We rarely notice it in the moment. It works softly, slowly, like a tide coming in while you sleep. It's tempting to think of this as a flaw, a defect in the system. The universe is one bad habit. But what if it is? What if this gentle, unstoppable unraveling isn't a mistake at all? What if it's the real story, the thread that ties every star and every second of your life into one? Before we try to answer that, before we talk about physics and philosophy and all the strange ways entropy shows up in your own heartbeat, we need to go back. Way back. When most of us hear the word entropy, if we've even heard it at all outside of a high school science class, it sounds like jargon, something too abstract to matter to a Tuesday afternoon or a sleepless night. We think it's about scientists in lab coats, equations scribbled on a chalkboard, maybe a vague idea of messiness. We imagine it as a kind of cosmic sloppiness, why ice cream melts on the counter, why your once pristine bookshelf turns into a game of Tetris, why the milk you forgot in the fridge begins to smell like something best left unnamed. It's that subtle shift from order to disorder, neat to messy, new to old. In casual conversation, we treat it almost like bad housekeeping. The average person's mental model is simple. Things naturally go from tidy to untidy, useful to broken, beautiful to faded. The assumption is that entropy is basically just stuff wears out. And in one sense, that's not wrong, but it's also not the whole truth. We tend to think of the world in terms of moments we can freeze in our mind. A perfect wedding cake just after it's decorated, a brand new phone fresh out of its box, a sunset where the sky is the right shade of impossible orange. In our heads, these moments are solid, permanent. We forget that the cake will be sliced, the phone will scratch, the orange sky will drain into black. Entropy is what quietly edits those perfect moments into memories. But here, where the cracks in that simple understanding start to appear. If entropy is all about disorder increasing, why does life seem to do the opposite sometimes? A seed becomes a tree. A messy room can be cleaned. Cities are built from dirt and rock and raw metal. Doesn't that mean entropy can be reversed? Doesn't that mean the universe allows pockets of order to emerge? That's where most casual explanations trip over themselves. Because yes, you can clean your room, but you've spent energy to do it. You've burned calories, your body has metabolized food, heat has escaped into the air. In the larger picture, the total amount of disorder has still increased, you've just relocated it. You've tidied the desk, but you've increased the entropy of your body, the air, the world. The part most people miss is that entropy isn't just about mess, in the visual sense, it's about the number of possible ways a system can be arranged. When ice melts, the water molecules have more freedom to move around than when they were locked in rigid ice crystals. That freedom means more possible arrangements, and that means more entropy. In our everyday lives, we confuse the appearance of order with actual decreases in entropy. A freshly made bed looks orderly, but in making it, you've actually increased the entropy of the room overall. Heat from your body, the wrinkling of the sheets, the sound vibrations in the air. And yet humans love to fight it. We build, arrange, archive, store. We take photos of our kids to freeze the moment before they grow up. We preserve ancient books in climate-controlled vaults. We put leftovers in the fridge to slow the march of rot. We chase permanence in a universe that doesn't trade in permanence. The unspoken assumption we carry is that entropy is the enemy, that if we're clever enough, organized enough, maybe we can win. But even when we slow it down, entropy is always collecting its toll in the background. The loaf of bread in your freezer will outlast the one on the counter, but it will still, eventually, stale. And here's the quiet truth. It's not just objects and systems that play by these rules. It's you. Your memories blur not because you stop caring, but because the physical structure of the brain itself changes, loses clarity. Your relationships shift, not always because of betrayal or distance, but because the energy that once held them in their exact shape has drifted elsewhere. When you start to see entropy not as some external invader, but as the default setting of the universe, the question changes. It's no longer, how do I stop it? But why is this the rule in the first place? That question will take us beyond the surface understanding, beyond the ice cream and the messy rooms, into the deep, old science that first gave us the word entropy in the first place. Because the truth is, the way we think about it now is not the way it was first understood. Once upon a time, entropy was a mystery even to the people who first named it. And the story of how they discovered it is where things start to get interesting. We have to imagine a world before the word entropy even existed, before physicists scribbled it into equations, before anyone thought to link the slow drift toward disorder to the deep machinery of the universe. Back then, the rules of nature seemed simple enough. In the age of Newton, the world was a clock, a grand, elegant, and predictable machine. If you knew the position and speed of every piece, you could, in theory, predict its future forever. It was a comforting idea. The planets circling like gears, apples falling with perfect inevitability, water flowing downhill, because that's what water does. Cause led to effect, and the story always made sense. This was the age of certainty. Energy, as far as most thinkers could see, was like money in a well-kept ledger. You could move it around, burn coal to boil water to drive pistons, but you couldn't create it from nothing or make it disappear. It was the era of steamships and railroads, the industrial revolution powered by fire and ambition. But then came the engineers and scientists who worked not with idealized planets and perfect apples, but with heat, messy, restless heat. They noticed something troubling. Every time you used energy, some of it seemed to slip away into a form you couldn't fully use again. A steam engine could haul cargo across a continent, but no engine was perfectly efficient. Some of the heat always escaped into the air, never to be recovered. At first, this felt like an engineering flaw, the kind that could be solved with better design. But as the 19th century moved on, scientists like Sadi Carnot, Rudolf Clausius, and Lord Kelvin began to suspect it wasn't a flaw at all. It was a law. No matter how clever you were, there would always be a portion of energy that got scattered, spread out, and lost to you. This was the birth of thermodynamics, and with it came a strange, unsettling realization. The universe's grand clockwork wasn't just ticking forward in perfect symmetry, it was winding down. Clausius coined the word entropy to describe this inevitable spreading of energy. Not a mechanical failure, but a cosmic principle. Entropy was not just about messiness. It was about the tendency for usable energy to disperse, for differences to even out. A hot object in a cold room will cool down, not because it chooses to, but because heat naturally flows from warmer to cooler until everything is the same lukewarm temperature. Once that happens, there's no gradient left to drive work, no wind in the sails, no river to turn the wheel. This law carried with it a haunting implication. If you scale it up, if you let enough time pass, the universe itself will run out of gradients. Stars will exhaust their fuel. Heat will spread evenly through space. No more motion, no more change, a heat death. The end of everything, not with a bang, but with a uniform, eternal sigh. In the 1800s, this wasn't just science. It was philosophy, theology, even poetry. The Victorian imagination was fascinated and unsettled by the idea that the universe had an irreversible arrow of time. Before this, time was just a way to mark change. Now it had direction. Forward meant toward more entropy always. Still, the Newtonian mindset clung on. We saw the universe as mechanical, rule-bound, and predictable. The idea that randomness and irreversibility were baked into reality felt almost like an insult to the perfection of nature. But entropy was relentless. in its logic. Even Darwin's ideas about evolution, emerging in the same century, seem to push against it. Life grows more complex over time, doesn't it? More ordered. Wasn't that the opposite of entropy? But thermodynamics had an answer. Life's complexity doesn't violate entropy because the order of living systems is paid for by increasing disorder somewhere else. The Earth's lush ecosystems thrive because the sun pours energy into them, and that energy eventually dissipates into space as heat. The global ledger still balances, entropy still wins. For decades, scientists worked comfortably within this framework. Entropy was about the large-scale, steam engines, chemical reactions, cosmic heat death. The microscopic world was still a mystery, an unseen realm where people assumed the same neat rules applied. Then came the troublemakers, the physicists who started looking deeper. Ludwig Boltzmann was one of them, daring to say that entropy wasn't just a macroscopic observation, but a statistical truth. He argued that what we call disorder was really about probability. There are simply more ways for a system to be disordered than ordered. Think of a deck of cards. There's only one way for it to be perfectly arranged by suit and number, but countless ways for it to be shuffled. Entropy, Boltzmann said, was about the odds, and the odds were overwhelmingly in favor of disorder. Boltzmann's ideas were revolutionary, but also deeply unpopular in his time. He faced harsh criticism and personal despair, and his story ended tragically. Yet his statistical view of entropy would later become the foundation of modern physics, influencing Einstein, quantum theory, and the way we think about time itself. By the early 20th century, the old story of science had shifted. The universe was no longer an eternal, reversible machine. It was a place where events had an irreversible tilt, where chance and probability danced alongside cause and effect. Entropy was no longer just an engineer's nuisance, it was the hidden current beneath the river of time. And if that current was always flowing toward greater disorder, what did that mean for the way we perceive the world? Because here's the thing, the second law of thermodynamics doesn't feel like it's in charge when you're looking at a blooming flower or watching snowflakes form perfect, symmetrical patterns. Our own brains seem to find beauty and meaning in things that look like they're resisting entropy. Which brings us to the next strange twist in the story, the way our minds, these fragile, energy-hungry biological machines, play along with entropy's rules without ever quite admitting it. Your brain is a curious thing. It knows, somewhere deep in its folds, that entropy is always in play, and yet it edits the world in such a way that you can almost believe it is. It's not lying to you, not exactly. It's just telling you the version of the story you can live with. From the moment you wake, your senses are not faithfully reporting reality, they're assembling an interpretation. Your eyes take in fractured signals, photons bouncing in from every direction, and your brain stitches them into a coherent scene. If something changes slowly enough, you often don't notice. The wall paint fades under the sun. A familiar street corner crumbles at the edges. An old friend's hair grays one strand at a time. Entropy's hand is slow and deliberate, and your brain is too busy maintaining a stable picture to sound the alarm. This is a kind of survival tactic. If you were constantly aware of every instance of decay and breakdown around you, it would be overwhelming. Your brain prefers patterns, stability, the reassurance that your coffee cup today is the same as it was yesterday. That's why, when disorder bursts in suddenly, like a shattered glass or an unexpected illness, it feels jarring. You're forced to see the arrow of time in action. But there's another trick. Your mind loves stories of order. That's why you remember your child's first birthday party in warm, vivid images, but forget the mundane Tuesdays that came before and after. Memory itself is selective, sculpted to preserve meaning, not accuracy. And in doing so, your brain creates an illusion that some moments are frozen, immune to change. In reality, those memories are slowly degrading, neurons rewiring, connections fading, details warping. Your mental photographs are developing cracks, but you don't notice until they've shifted too far to ignore. This tendency to ignore gradual disorder works hand in hand with our emotional filters. We gravitate toward beauty, symmetry, and completion because they feel safe. A clean desk invites focus. A perfectly plated meal feels more satisfying. These preferences are not coincidences, they're evolutionary tools. Organisms that could find and maintain pockets of order often fared better in chaotic environments. That doesn't stop entropy from creeping in. It just means we've learned to carve temporary sanctuaries against it. Here, where it gets stranger, sometimes the brain actively creates patterns where none exist. It's called pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in clouds, shapes in shadows, order in randomness. This might be our most human defiance of entropy, the instinct to impose meaning on the mess. In a purely random scatter of stars, we see constellations. In static noise, we hear whispers. The universe leans toward chaos, but our minds lean toward narrative. And yet, despite our best storytelling instincts, entropy is a constant partner in the architecture of the brain itself. Every thought you have costs energy. Neurons fire, neurotransmitters are released, and heat, waste energy, is shed. Your brain is an expensive machine, consuming about 20% of your body's total energy, even when you're doing nothing productive. This energy use inevitably produces entropy within you. Every moment you live is also a moment you're increasing the total disorder of the universe. It's not all grim, though. This constant interplay of order and disorder is what allows you to learn. Memories form because proteins fold in precise ways inside your neurons, but those same proteins eventually degrade. Synaptic connections strengthen with use, but they also prune away when neglected. In a strange sense, entropy is the editor that keeps your mind from becoming an overwhelming archive of useless detail. It's the reason you can adapt and move forward, even if it means losing pieces of the past. There's a deep paradox here. We fear entropy because it erodes what we love, but without it, we'd be stuck, unable to change, unable to grow. A photograph doesn't age, but it also never learns anything new. Your brain's constant remodeling, even when it feels like loss, is also what makes you capable of becoming someone different than you were yesterday. And so you live inside this quiet compromise. Your mind filters out most of entropy's slow work so you can function. You clean up the edges where you can, refresh the paint, restore the memory with a story you've told too many times. You accept a little illusion if it means you can keep going. But if entropy is in the brain, shaping your perception, what happens when we stop looking at the human scale entirely? What if we zoom in, far beyond what even the sharpest eyes can see, down to the level of molecules, atoms, and the strange behavior that rules the tiniest pieces of existence? Because down there, entropy doesn't just continue, it gets weird. If you could shrink yourself down past skin and bone, past the level of cells and the molecules that make them, you'd find a world where the rules you know dissolve. Down here, the logic of falling apart, entropy still applies, but it doesn't look like spilled coffee or crumbling walls. It's stranger, more slippery, almost mischievous. At the scale of atoms, disorder isn't about mess in the way we usually imagine it. It's about possibilities. A gas molecule in a box doesn't look messy, it's just free to move in countless ways. The more ways it can move, the higher the entropy. In our everyday lives, that might translate to a melting ice cube. But here, it's a dance of unimaginable speed, a blur of collisions and vibrations. And then, when you go even smaller, down to the quantum level, something unsettling happens. Particles don't just have positions and speeds, they have probabilities. You can't say exactly where an electron is, only the odds of it being in one place or another. The universe at this level isn't a tidy machine, it's a restless haze. In this haze, entropy isn't just a background condition, it's almost a storyteller, deciding which possibilities fade away and which solidify. Superposition, the quantum state where a particle can be in multiple states at once, feels like defiance of entropy. But the moment you measure it, the wave function collapses into one outcome. The infinite possibilities narrow to one, and in doing so, entropy takes a little step forward. Then there's quantum entanglement, two particles, no matter how far apart, linked so that their states are intertwined. If you change one, the other responds instantly. It sounds like magic, but it's part of the deep machinery of reality. Even here, entropy lurks. Entangled states are delicate, easily disturbed. The more the environment interacts with them, through heat, light, random jostling, the more those perfect correlations break down. The weirdest part, The randomness at the quantum scale is not the same as the randomness of flipping a coin. It's fundamental. It's baked into the way the universe works. And every time that randomness plays out, it feeds the great upward slope of entropy, the reason why there's an arrow to time at all. If you were to zoom in on the atoms inside your own body, you'd see entropy's fingerprints everywhere. The constant jiggling of molecules in your cells, the slow degradation of DNA over decades, the inevitable chemical drift in the neurotransmitters that keep your mind alight. Every heartbeat, every breath, is the result of energy being burned in a way that spreads disorder into your surroundings. There's a kind of paradox here. Life exists by creating order within itself, cells maintaining structure, DNA replicating, proteins folding, but to do so, it must constantly export disorder to the outside world. You survive not by escaping entropy, but by managing the flow of it. You're a local island of order in an ocean that always leans toward chaos. Physicists sometimes talk about entropy in terms of microstates and macrostates. A macrostate is the big picture description, say, a cup of coffee cooling on the table. The microstates are the countless tiny arrangements of molecules that could still fit that big picture description. Over time, the system moves toward macrostates that have more possible microstates, simply because there are more ways for things to be disordered than ordered. This is why, left alone, the coffee always cools. It's not that it wants to, it's just statistically inevitable. And yet there's beauty in this inevitability. Without the tendency toward more microstates, without the drive toward mixing and blending, the universe would be static. Stars would never burn, rivers would never flow, winds would never blow. Entropy is the silent permission slip for motion itself. Still, when you dwell too long at this microscopic scale, you start to wonder, if this law holds true for the smallest things we can observe, what happens when we zoom out as far as we can go? What does entropy look like when you're not staring into an atom, but into the universe itself? Because if the tiny is strange, the vast is even stranger, and the story it tells might be the most haunting of all. Imagine pulling back from the quantum haze, rising through the scale of existence until the atoms blur together, until even entire planets shrink to specks. The further you pull back, the more entropy reveals itself in slow, grand movements, like a tide you can't feel from the shore but can see pulling at continents. In space, entropy is written in the language of heat and light, and the faint background whisper of ancient radiation. Every star you see is a temporary oasis, a furnace burning through its fuel, creating order in the form of light and warmth, but paying for it with vast quantities of heat spilled into the cold. Stars are entropy machines, taking concentrated fuel and scattering its energy across the black. Our own sun is no different. It's a bright, steady defiance against the darkness, but that defiance has an expiration date. In about 5 billion years, its fuel will run low. The concentrated hydrogen will be spent, the fusion will falter, and the sun will swell into a red giant before shrinking to a white dwarf, cooling slowly, endlessly, into obscurity, a cosmic ember. Galaxies themselves are entropic structures. Their elegant spiral arms are made of stars at every stage of life and death, but gravity only holds them together for so long. Over unimaginable spans of time, collisions, mergers, and the steady leakage of energy will tear them apart. The universe is expanding, and entropy is riding that expansion outward like a silent passenger. Even black holes, those monuments to gravity, are not exempt. For a long time, they were thought to be eternal vaults. Nothing escapes them. But Stephen Hawking showed that they leak energy too, in the form of Hawking radiation. Given enough time, far more than the current age of the universe, black holes themselves will evaporate, their contents spilled irretrievably into the void. And then there's the most chilling possibility of all, the heat death of the universe. If entropy keeps increasing and energy keeps dispersing, there will come a point when everything is evenly spread out. No gradients, no differences, no reason for anything to happen at all. The cosmos would become a perfectly balanced, perfectly still expanse, a universe without story. Astronomers can see the seeds of this already. The cosmic microwave background is the afterglow of the Big Bang, still hanging in every direction, cooling with the expansion. It's faint now, just 2.7 degrees above absolute zero, but it's a reminder that the early universe was a hot, ordered place, and that order has been thinning out for nearly 14 billion years. And yet there's a strange beauty to it, because if entropy is what drives the universe toward this stillness, it's also what makes the present moment possible. Without it, stars wouldn't burn. Without burning stars, planets wouldn't form. Without planets, life would never have had a foothold to begin with. Entropy may write the ending, but it also wrote the prologue. That's the paradox the cosmos keeps whispering. The same law that will someday extinguish every light in the sky is the same law that allowed you to be here, listening to this story right now. Of course, this whole grand arc, the birth of stars, the expansion of space, the slow cooling of everything, assumes that what we see is real in the straightforward way we imagine. But what if it is? What if the vastness, the galaxies, even entropy itself, are just part of an elaborate simulation? What if none of it is real at all? It's a strange thought, isn't it? That everything you've ever known, your body, the planet beneath your feet, the stars scattered across the night sky, might not be real in the way you assume. That entropy itself, the law we've followed from melting ice to dying galaxies, could be nothing more than a rule inside an elaborate game. Simulation theory is not a bedtime story we invented for fun. It's a hypothesis taken seriously by philosophers and some scientists. The idea is deceptively simple. If it's possible to create a convincing simulation of reality, and if intelligent civilizations tend to do so, then the odds that we are living in the one true base reality are not good. We're more likely to be inside one of the countless simulations built by someone or something else. If that's true, then entropy might be just a parameter in the code. The melting ice cube, the collapsing star, the fading memory, these could be programmed behaviors, part of the simulation's realism. In a way, that makes entropy even more haunting. It would mean not only is the universe destined to end, but that ending was deliberately designed. But it doesn't have to be digital to be unreal. Philosophers have wrestled with versions of this idea for centuries. Descartes wondered how we could be sure an evil demon wasn't tricking us into believing in a false world. The brain in a vat thought experiment asks us to imagine our consciousness as nothing more than neural signals fed by a machine. If your experiences feel real to you, does it matter whether the world producing them exists? And then there's the dream question. You've been inside dreams so vivid they felt solid. The walls you touched, the streets you walked, the people you spoke to gone the moment you woke. What if waking life is just another layer of dream? If you've ever had a moment where the world felt a little too crisp, a little too staged, like the light was too perfect or the timing of events too coincidental, you've brushed against that unsettling thought. Even physics offers strange hints. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles exist in a haze of probabilities until they're observed. Some interpretations, like the consciousness causes collapse idea, suggest that reality doesn't fully solidify until it's measured. If so, are we participants in creating the universe moment by moment? Is the world waiting for us to look before it decides what's real? If reality is a simulation, or a dream, or something dependent on consciousness, then entropy might not be an absolute law. It might just be the story's internal consistency. The characters in a novel might notice that time only moves forward, that things decay, that there's an arrow to their existence, but that arrow exists because the author wrote it that way. The unsettling part is that in all of these possibilities, the boundaries of reality are not under your control. Whether it's a simulation you can't escape, a dream you can't wake from, or a quantum world you can only influence in tiny, probabilistic ways, you're still living inside a framework you didn't choose. And yet, you still experience joy, love, beauty, loss, emotions that feel undeniably real, even if the stage they play out on is an illusion. Maybe that's the key. Maybe it doesn't matter whether the set is solid stone or painted cardboard. The play still moves you, the tears are still wet, the laughter is still warm. The meaning you find in it is not diminished by the possibility that it's all pixels or probabilities. Still, the question lingers. If reality can be bent, simulated, or dreamed, what about the parts of entropy we can't yet explain? The gaps in our understanding, the mysteries that even our most advanced science hasn't resolved. Because no matter how you frame it, whether as a machine, a dream, or a quantum stage, there are still missing pieces. And those pieces might be the most important part of the story. Even after centuries of studying it, entropy holds corners of shadow we can't quite illuminate. We've measured it, defined it, even written its equations with the confidence of cartographers mapping familiar land. But here and there, the map just stops. The paper tears. The path fades into darkness. One mystery is the beginning itself. If entropy always increases, that means it must have started low, unbelievably low, at the birth of the universe. But why? Why would the Big Bang emerge in such an exquisitely ordered state? The odds of that happening by chance are so astronomically small that some physicists compare it to shuffling a deck of cards and having it come out in perfect order, not just once, but over and over again. Some suggest that this low entropy beginning is simply a given, a brute fact with no deeper explanation. Others propose that our universe might be just one bubble in a vast multiverse, and that in other pockets of reality, entropy's story plays out differently or doesn't exist at all. But these are ideas you can't test easily, if at all. They sit at the edge of science, shimmering like mirages. Another puzzle, the microscopic laws of physics are mostly time-symmetric. If you filmed a billiard ball colliding with another and played the clip backward, the physics would still work. At that scale, there's no built-in arrow of time, and yet, at the macroscopic level, we feel that arrow constantly. Eggs break, they don't unbreak. People age, they don't grow younger. Where exactly does the asymmetry slip in? Boltzmann's statistical mechanics gave us one answer. Entropy increases because the overwhelming majority of possible microstates correspond to what we call disorder. But that still leaves an itch. If the microscopic rules don't care about direction, why do we only ever remember the past and not the future? Why does cause always seem to precede effect in our experience? Then there's the strange link between entropy and information. In physics, information isn't just trivia, it's a measurable quantity tied to the number of possible states a system can have. The more microstates, the more entropy, but in certain interpretations, losing information about a system, like when something falls into a black hole, seems to violate the laws of physics, unless somehow that information is never truly lost, just scrambled beyond recognition. This information paradox is one of the thorniest debates in modern physics, and it has forced some scientists to rethink what entropy really means. We also can't ignore the role of consciousness. We measure entropy from within the universe, using instruments built by conscious beings. Could it be that the way we perceive time and disorder is shaped by the architecture of our own minds? That the arrow of time is, at least in part, a projection of the way we process reality? If so, then understanding entropy fully might require not just physics, but neuroscience, psychology, even philosophy. And what about the endgame scenarios? Heat death is the classic prediction, but others have proposed alternatives. A big rip, where the accelerating expansion of space tears even atoms apart. A big crunch, where the universe's expansion reverses and collapses back into itself. Or a cosmic bounce, where collapse leads to a new Big Bang. Each of these endings tells a different story about entropy's ultimate fate, but right now we don't know which, if any, will come true. In the quiet spaces between what we know and what we can only guess, there's a peculiar comfort. The missing pieces remind us that we haven't finished the book, that the universe is still, in some sense, in progress. Mystery keeps the story alive. And even if we never solve it completely, we're still living with entropy every day, in our bodies, in our routines, in the rhythms of our biology. It's not just a cosmic principle, it's something intimate, personal, constant. Which means the next step is to bring it back home, to look not at the galaxies or the atoms, but at you. Entropy isn't only written in the galaxies overhead, it's stitched into your skin, your cells, the quiet mechanics of your heartbeat. You don't just live in a universe that's falling apart. You are, in some sense, a microcosm of it. From the moment you were born, your body has been in negotiation with entropy. You're an intricate structure made of trillions of cells, each with precise architecture, each carrying out millions of chemical reactions every second. All of this order requires constant energy to maintain. The proteins that keep your muscles contracting, the enzymes that power digestion, the iron pumps that let your neurons fire. Every one of these is fighting entropy locally, holding chaos at bay. But there's no free lunch. The only way to maintain that order is to export disorder somewhere else. When you breathe, you take in oxygen and burn glucose for fuel. This produces carbon dioxide, water, and heat, all forms of energy more spread out, less concentrated. In this exchange, you keep your body running, but you increase the entropy of your surroundings. Life survives by being an island of order in an expanding ocean of chaos. You feel it in subtle ways every day. That afternoon slump, it's partly your circadian rhythm, your internal clock, responding to the ebb and flow of hormones, but it's also a reminder that energy gets spent and needs replenishing. The reason sleep is non-negotiable isn't just rest, it's maintenance. While you sleep, your body clears metabolic waste from your brain, repairs DNA, replenishes neurotransmitters. Sleep doesn't stop entropy, but it slows the fraying, the way a tailor might stitch a seam before the fabric tears further. Still, the negotiation isn't one you can win forever. Proteins misfold, cells accumulate damage, mitochondria, the power plants of your cells, become less efficient over time. Some of this is the slow erosion of entropy at work, gently loosening the threads of the tapestry. And yet that same process is also part of why you grow, adapt, and heal. Muscle fibers tear under strain and rebuild stronger. Neural connections form and prune away based on what you practice and what you neglect. Your immune system learns by fighting off invaders, and that learning changes its structure permanently. Entropy isn't just a thief, it's a sculptor reshaping you constantly. On an emotional level, entropy shapes your experience of time. You can't relive your childhood, not because the moments aren't precious enough to return to, but because your body and mind have changed. The hormones that once made the summer air smell sweeter are gone. The sensory pathways that once made the swing set feel like flying have been rewired. The moment is not recoverable because the physical you that experienced it no longer exists. Even the things you think of as stable, your resting heartbeat, your breathing, are dynamic balances, constantly shifting to keep you alive. Stop supplying energy to those systems, and entropy rushes in like a tide through a broken dam. Some traditions see this constant change as a lesson in impermanence. The Buddhist notion that everything is transient isn't just philosophy, it's a reflection of the physics playing out in your own blood and bones. In a strange way, the more you notice entropy's work in your body, the more precious the present moment becomes. And there's something grounding about that. The cosmic heat death is billions of years away. The breakdown of your cells is gradual. Right now, in this breath, your body is still doing its improbable balancing act, burning fuel, pumping ions, holding its shape against the pull of disorder. It's still, in this moment, winning its small battle. But humans are storytellers, and we like to measure our battles. Which raises another question: how did we ever start measuring something so invisible, so inevitable in the first place? Long before entropy was a word, people knew deep in their bones that nothing stayed the same. They saw it in the way fruit rotted, fires cooled to ash, bodies aged, and the tallest mountains wore down grain by grain under rain and wind. To ancient minds, this was not a scientific law, it was a fact of existence, woven into the rhythms of life and death. Early myths and philosophies framed this slow unraveling in stories. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh spoke of the inevitability of death and the futility of seeking immortality. In ancient Greece, Heraclitus said, "All things flow," and warned that you could never step into the same river twice, not because the river moves, but because you do. Change was the only constant, and loss was simply one form of change. For centuries, people understood this only through the senses. They measured time by the fading of daylight, the changing of the seasons, the growth and decay of crops. Sundials, water clocks, and hourglasses didn't just track hours, they marked the slow movement toward endings. The first attempts to quantify change in the physical world came from practical needs: keeping food from spoiling, building structures that lasted, moving goods efficiently. Ancient engineers and alchemists learned, in their own way, about the limits of preservation. No matter how carefully grain was stored, pests and mold eventually found it. Metals rusted, wood warped. They didn't call it entropy, but they were bumping up against it constantly. It wasn't until the scientific revolution that humanity began to peel back the curtain. The rise of thermodynamics in the 18th and 19th centuries driven by the steam engine, changed everything. James Watt's engine was a marvel, but it also made engineers ask uncomfortable questions. Why couldn't all the heat from burning coal be turned into motion? Why was some energy always wasted as heat that couldn't do work? Enter scientists like Sadi Carnot, who realized that there were fundamental limits to efficiency, not because of bad engineering, but because of the nature of heat itself. Rudolf Clausius formalized the concept and gave it a name, entropy, from the Greek en in and trope, transformation. It was a measure not of messiness, but of how energy was spread out. The more spread out, the less useful it was for doing work. This was more than an engineering concern, it was a shift in worldview. The old clockwork universe of Newton still ticked, but now it had a direction. Time didn't just pass, it moved one way. The second law of thermodynamics declared that entropy in an isolated system never decreases. The arrow of time was drawn. And then came the philosophers and poets. The Victorians, with their fascination for death and decay, seized on entropy as both a scientific truth and a metaphor for the fragility of human achievements. The notion of a heat death of the universe, where all energy would one day be evenly spread, making change impossible, captured imaginations and haunted sermons. The 20th century brought new tools and deeper understanding. Ludwig Boltzmann connected entropy to probability, showing that it was really about the number of microscopic configurations a system could have. Albert Einstein, working with statistical mechanics, reinforced this probabilistic view. Entropy was no longer just about heat, it was about information, chance, and the underlying possibilities of matter itself. By mid-century, Claude Shannon extended the idea into the realm of communication. His information entropy measured uncertainty in messages, linking the fate of data to the same mathematical principles that govern the cooling of stars. Suddenly, entropy was not just about engines and the cosmos, it was about knowledge, memory, even language. Through all these shifts, the human relationship to entropy remained deeply personal. We continued to preserve what we could, mummifying bodies, photographing loved ones, writing books, building monuments, but we also came to see that these efforts don't defeat entropy, they just delay its effects. The pyramids erode, photographs fade, digital files corrupt. The arrow of time keeps drawing itself forward. And yet each culture has found ways to make peace with it. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi celebrates impermanence and imperfection. The ancient Stoics advised focusing only on what you can control and accepting the rest as the way of the world. Indigenous traditions often honor cycles of growth, death, and renewal, framing entropy not as loss, but as transformation. Which leads to one of the most unsettling turns in our story. What if entropy, as we think of it, isn't even real in the way we imagine? What if it's not a fundamental law at all, but a kind of emergent illusion? After spending centuries defining, measuring, and revering entropy as one of the pillars of physical law, there's a quietly radical question that refuses to go away. What if it isn't real at all? Not in the sense that nothing changes, you can watch ice melt and stars die without consulting a physics textbook, but in the sense that entropy might not be a fundamental property of the universe. It might be something that emerges only from certain perspectives, a statistical shadow cast by the way we choose to look at things. Consider this, at the microscopic level, the laws of physics don't care about time's direction. Reverse the motion of every particle in a perfect simulation, and they'll retrace their steps precisely. In that view, entropy isn't a cosmic truth, it's a consequence of not knowing every detail. The disorder we talk about may be nothing more than a measure of our ignorance. This is the emergent school of thought. Entropy is not a thing in itself, but a way of describing patterns in large systems. It's like temperature. Individual particles don't have temperature. Only when you have enough of them together, moving and colliding, does the concept make sense. In the same way, maybe the arrow of time doesn't exist for the universe itself, but only for observers like us, embedded inside it. Then there's the idea that entropy is relational. It depends on how you define order and disorder, which in turn depends on what you choose to measure. To you, a deck of shuffled cards looks disordered because you're comparing it to the neat sequence you prefer. But to someone who doesn't know or care about that sequence, the shuffle might look no less ordered. than the arrangement you began with? Could it be that the universe's so-called disorder is only disorder from a human point of view? Some even go further, suggesting entropy might be an illusion created by the expansion of the universe. In this view, the increase we see over time is a kind of bookkeeping effect, a result of how we divide the universe into systems and surroundings. If we could somehow step outside the whole picture, the rise of entropy might vanish entirely, replaced by something static and eternal. But perhaps the boldest proposal comes from thinkers who link entropy directly to consciousness. They argue that time's arrow, and therefore entropy, is a construct of how our minds record and recall events. We remember the past and not the future because that's the only direction in which our memories can form. Our perception of entropy increasing might be more about how memory works than about the universe itself. If that's true, then entropy is like the horizon at sea, a limit that feels physical and inevitable, but which moves as you move. The horizon isn't a wall, and entropy might not be a wall either. It could be a mirage, endlessly receding. Of course, even if entropy is emergent, relational, or illusory, it still has teeth. Illusions can be deadly if you ignore them. Gravity, too, is now considered by some physicists to be emergent, yet jump from a high enough ledge, and the result will be no less real. Whether entropy is a bedrock truth or just a useful story, it still shapes the arc of your life. And maybe that's the real point. Whether it's fundamental or not, entropy has been our companion from the start of this conversation, from the melting ice cube to the fading star. We've followed it through the smallest particles and the largest galaxies, through history and philosophy, through the pulse in your wrist. We've traveled far together tonight. And now, as we reach the last bend in this long road, it's time to slow down, not to solve the mystery once and for all, but to sit quietly with it, here at the edge of the night. And here we are, back where we started. You, wherever you are in the world tonight. The room around you is quiet, maybe lit by a faint glow from a lamp, or by nothing at all except the soft spill of moonlight. Outside, the air carries whatever season you're in, warm, cool, damp, dry, and somewhere, the stars are still burning their patient light toward you. The universe hasn't changed since we began speaking, not in any dramatic way. Stars have not winked out mid-sentence. Galaxies haven't spun themselves into knots or reversed their orbits. And yet, everything has changed. You've taken in new thoughts, followed the thread of an idea through centuries and light years, and back into your own body. The neurons that make you have rearranged themselves in microscopic ways. Entropy has been at work here too, even now, in the act of listening. Your phone or computer has warmed slightly from the effort of delivering these words to you. Heat has slipped into the air. Energy has been burned in the tiny muscles that keep your eyes still or your breathing steady. This conversation, as invisible as it feels, has left its fingerprints on the world. And that is the quiet truth of all of this. Entropy is not a villain waiting at the end of the road. It's the road itself. Without it, there would be no stars, no seasons, no lives to live, no moments to remember. Without the falling apart, there would be no coming together. Think of the people you've known, the ones who arrived in your life fully formed, and the ones you've built connections with over years. Each of those relationships is a temporary structure. They shift, they fade, they deepen, they break. But in their changing, they give shape to your story. The endings make the beginnings possible. Entropy isn't just the story of the universe, it's the story of being human. The moments we cherish most are precious precisely because they cannot be kept forever. We hold them for a while, we breathe them in, and then we let them join the tide. And tonight, whenever tonight is for you, you can lie there and know this. You are part of something vast and intricate, something that has been unfolding for nearly 14 billion years. Every cell in your body is an echo of stars that burned and died long before there was an Earth to stand on. The atoms in your hands were once scattered across unimaginable distances, now gathered here, briefly, as you. One day, far from now, those atoms will scatter again, and that scattering will not be a failure. It will be the next chapter in a story that has never stopped writing itself. So take this moment, right now, and feel the shape of your breath. Notice how your chest rises and falls without your asking. Notice the stillness between each inhale and exhale, The way the air feels cool in your nose and warm as it leaves you. Somewhere in the silence between those breaths is the whole of the universe, its birth, its expansion, its slow drift towards stillness. And whatever this thing called reality is, simulation, dream, probability cloud, or something so far beyond our language we can't name it, in this moment it is here. It is you, breathing softly, still awake, still dreaming.